Okay, in this video, I'm just going to walk through a Fusion 360 add-in that I've been working on. I'm calling it Fusion Bolter, and it's basically for creating bolted connections where you have something like this, and you want to kind of automatically place bolts, nuts, and washers. Right now, it is working on through-hole connections like this. So to manage this, I'm using Google Sheets to manage the sizes and configuration of the different pieces of hardware. And to use the application, the first thing you'll need to do is download it and install it. So go to the link below in the description, and that will take you to this page, which is my GitHub page where you can download Fusion Bolter. Click here to download it, and you can follow some installation instructions to get it installed. Once it's installed, you'll see when you click on add-ins in Fusion, you should see it here in this list. You'll see Fusion Bolter, and you can set it to run and run on startup. So it's still definitely under development, but I wanted to just give a quick video to kind of show how to use it in its current form to anybody who wants to give it a try and maybe give some feedback on what is working, what you like, what you don't like. So when you get this loaded, you'll see there's four options here. This is going to be the option to actually add the bolts. There's another option to just simply count all the holes. We'll also have a button for preparing the hardware basically to use with this. And then the final button is something that you have to do just once, but it will basically establish the connection to Google Sheets. So the first time that you run it, you have to run this last command here, configure, and we'll choose the option to create a new sheet. And again, the first time you run it, it's going to ask you to sign in and authorize the application. So you're going to click here. It'll say this Sheets integration wants to connect basically to your Google account. And then what you'll notice after that happens is it'll give you this message: the authentication flow is completed. That lets you know that everything is good. And then Fusion is gonna it seems like it's hanging, but what's really happening is in the background, I'm downloading a copy of the sheet that I'll use as give you a sort of a starting template. And when it's done, it'll pop it up. It's also creating some kind of starter models so that when you use it for the first time, you'll have something to kind of start with. So let's walk through what just got created. So you'll find now you'll have a Google Sheet at the kind of root of your Google Drive folder, I guess you'd say. And in here, you'll see there, when you're working with this, you can add more hardware and you can download specs from different suppliers' websites, etc. I'll show you how to set up the models. But when you're working with one of these, there's a couple of things that have to be a certain way. So you have to have a sheet, a tabbed sheet here. You have to have one called master, and it has to have these three columns. So the type, there's three possible types: washer, nut, and bolt. And again, you can add to this. Description will be how they're presented in the UI, and then the model will be the name, the explicit name of the 3D model associated with this, and I'll show you that more in a second. And then these descriptions have to match the name of the sheet. So again, this is all created to start with, but if we look at, let's say if we look at SAE washer regular, we can look at the sheet and you'll see now that I've got columns for the different dimensions. And again, you have to have a column called number because that's how we're going to keep track of what's unique and not. And then the rest of these headers are kind of optional, but they at some level they need to be associated to the different dimensions of the actual washer model itself. So like diameter, outer diameter, and thickness in the case of this washer. And then there's a third component, which is this min and max. And so what this is basically saying is that for a number 0 washer, this washer will be used from holes that have a diameter of 0.06 up through holes that have a diameter of 0.073. And basically, when you look in the sheet, all that really is saying is that to go from the diameter and then the max value is just looking at the next size. And so you can kind of, if you wanted to replicate that to make a new sheet for a washer or a bolt or a nut, you can kind of follow that same logic. So now that I've configured it, let's jump in here and take a look at what it looks like to actually use this. So I've got a sort of simple example here, but I think it illustrates it nicely. We've got a few components with some gaps and different size holes at different heights. So if I come in and I say that I want to add through hold fastener stack, I'm prompted to pick the top faces. So we're going to say you can pick any amount of top faces. They also don't have to be parallel or anything. So we'll pick all the faces that we want to look for the tops, and then pick faces to look for the bottom. And basically, what it's going to do is it's going to try to match between those two to find holes, stacks, basically. Then we can apply a bolt extension, and then this is looking at that Google Sheet, so looking at the different options I have for bolts, washers, and nuts. I'll choose a bolt, a washer, and nut, and hit OK. And so now what's going to happen is it's actually importing these models and sizing them appropriately. And so the way it works is it's basically you have created a kind of a template model for each of the families. So if I want to create a hex nut, I just create one hex nut model in Fusion, and then I associate the parameters of that nut to the Google Sheet, and that's what controls all of the size options. You'll also see, so you'll see what's happening is it's picking the appropriate size based on the diameter of the hole, and then it's also figuring out the appropriate lengths. And then I get a little summary here. It tells me that it did these holes and this was the sizes of the different holes and how many of each one, and there it is. Now I've got bolts placed in all of these holes at the appropriate length and at the appropriate size. And you'll also note that for when there are three of the same, it actually does the correct instancing. So you have kind of 1, 2, 3 for the different of the same, so that your bill of materials will count the quantities correctly. So that's how you use it. The other thing to note is how to set it up if you wanted to have a new piece of hardware, right? So the way this works is based on Fusion's parameters. So the nice thing about parametric modeling is you can change the values of dimensions and have the models update. So to work with a new model here, I've got this washer, and it's basically just a sketch extruded. If we look at the sketch, you'll see it's just 2 diameters, and then it's extruded to a certain value. And one of the things that you can do in Fusion that will make this a lot easier for you is you can actually change the name of the dimensions. So if you look at my sketch 1, there's those 2 diameter dimensions, and by default they probably would have been D1, D2. You can rename them here, so I'm going to rename it to outer diameter and diameter, and then in the extrude I'm going to rename the depth of the extrude to thickness. This is going to make it easier to modify later. So you can go ahead and rename these in a new washer model that you might have, or a new bolt model. The question's been asked if you can just download a step file from a supplier's website, and the answer is pretty much no. You could use it as kind of a basis, but you really need to model from scratch here so that you have all of these dimensions that can be varied, because what's going to happen is that the values from the spreadsheet are going to get applied over the top of this, and it's going to change the size of the washer. So it has to be a fully parametric model. So the last command in here is prepare hardware. So when you click on this, you can define what it is. Is it a bolt, a washer, or a nut? And then there's some options here. So I can just call this new, SAE washer. That's going to give me the description, and then there's some selections here. So for a bolt and a nut, you need to define just the bottom face. That'd be the underside of the head of the bolt. And in the case of the washer, you're going to explicitly define the top and the bottom. And what that's going to do is it's going to, underneath the hood, it's basically tagging those faces. And that's what's going to allow for all of that nice automatic joint creation when we used it. So now when I say OK here, what that's doing is it's actually doing a couple of things in the background. One is it's exporting the kind of tagged up model to use as the base for this size into the configuration directory, which I'll show in a second. And it's also now updated my spreadsheet. So now you can see the Google Sheet, a new row has been added that's a washer with the new description, new SAE washer, and again a link to the model on disk that I used, and also a new tab has been created here with just a single row set up for you. And so now what you would do is go, download, go to some spec sheet or wherever you're going to get the information from, and maybe you have a bunch of diameter values, right, that you're going to get from somewhere else or wherever you get them from. So you can put in the values of the diameter, you can put in the values of the thickness, whatever that is, and then build up this new size here. So I'm just making this kind of random, but let's just grab one more of these. So again, this is like defining my new washer. And then and then of course you would probably have some part numbers here. So we'll say that this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or whatever. And then you could actually put in the correct part numbers, whether that's your company part number, supplier part number, etc. And just from a management standpoint, you can add as many columns to this as you want. Just if you want to track other pieces of metadata or whatever alongside of this, if you have company part numbers, supplier part numbers, whatever, you can just keep track all of that in this spreadsheet. But what Fusion 360 is actually going to look at, it's got to be name. The column name has to be number, and that's what's going to use to identify whether or not this is unique. And then of course, you could this doesn't really matter. And then the key here would just be to say, okay, I'm going to use this for what minimum and maximum. So maybe what I'll do here is set my description to be the whole size. And because this would actually be the sort of nominal hole size. It's not actually dimensions on the washer. This is going to be the nominal hole size. But either way, I could add another column for that. It doesn't matter. And then here's just the quick way to do this min max thing, is to say that the minimum is the nominal hole size, and then the maximum is the next value's nominal hole size. And then you could just kind of drag these down, and you'll end up with a blank one down here, and you could just say that this is, whatever the next logical size would be, something like maybe that. And so now I could, that's really everything that you need to do. Now this new washer is going to be available for me to use. One thing to note is that on disk, you'll notice in your user directory, so if you're on a Mac, it's this home directory. On Windows, it would be whatever the Windows users home directory is. And you'll see a folder in here called Fusion Bolter. This is where all of the kind of configuration is being handled. There's some credentials things here, which is saving your credentials for your connection to Google Sheets. And then there's the models directory. So there was the default ones. And then if you add more, they'll keep adding into this directory. Again, that's like very important. That's where it's looking for the models that are referenced here. And also there's a little settings file, and basically all that's keeping track of at the current state is uh, the Google Sheet that your whole kind of project is associated with. So that's it. I mean, it's a few steps to set it up. Again, you could just run the configure and immediately start using my kind of default sizes if you just want to try it out. And then if you want to go about the exercise of adding your own hardware, that's when you really get into the this prepare hardware option. Hope you like it. Let me know what you think, what else you want it to do. I can't make any promises. Again, this is just something I kind of do for fun on the side, but I think this one's going to be good. So, feel free to leave comments below. Thank you so much.